Have you ever noticed something strange? The smartest person you know isn't always the richest. They solve impossible problems at work, they remember facts no one else can, people admire their intelligence. Yet somehow their finances are a mess. They chase investments that never pay off. They jump into trends at the wrong time, they overthink decisions until the opportunity disappears. Shouldn't intelligence lead to better financial decisions? History suggests otherwise. More than 300 years ago, one of the greatest scientific minds alive watched his fortune disappear almost overnight. Not because he lacked knowledge, because for one brief moment he behaved exactly like everyone else. That man was Isaac Newton. When shares of the South Sea Company began soaring, Newton invested early and made a healthy profit. Then he watched the price keep climbing after he'd already sold. Friends were getting richer, so he bought back in near the top. Weeks later the bubble burst, his fortune evaporated. Newton reportedly admitted something that still echoes through financial history. He could calculate the movements of planets but not the madness of people. He didn't lose because he misunderstood mathematics. He lost because money isn't only about mathematics, it's about human behavior. And that's where intelligence becomes unreliable, because the abilities that make someone brilliant can quietly become the reason they make terrible financial decisions. Here's the mistake most people make: they assume good financial decisions come from knowing more books, more data, more podcasts. But if knowledge alone created wealth, every economics professor would be a millionaire. Every financial decision passes through two systems in your brain. One is slow and analytical. The other is fast and emotional. Most of the time, the emotional one is driving, and your logical brain just builds a story afterward to explain the decision it already made. It's an investment, I'll regret missing out, this won't come again. The decision comes first, the explanation comes after. And here's the problem: the smarter you are, the better your brain gets at building convincing reasons. A highly intelligent person can justify almost anything. Buying at the peak feels like thinking long-term. Holding a collapsing investment feels like being patient. To everyone else it looks like stubbornness, to them it feels rational. That's the first trap. It doesn't begin with greed, it begins with certainty. After a few winning trades, people stop thinking they got lucky. They start thinking they have instincts. Psychologists call this overconfidence bias, overestimating what we know, underestimating what we don't. Intelligence makes it worse. When you're used to being right at work, your brain expects to be right everywhere, but the market doesn't reward confidence, it rewards probabilities. Even the world's best investors are wrong constantly. The difference is they expect to be. They're not obsessed with proving themselves right, they're obsessed with limiting how wrong they can be. There's a second trap, and it looks like hard work. Imagine two people building wealth. One spends 20 minutes a month in a diversified index fund, then moves on with life. The other has 6 monitors running, charts, forecasts, financial news around the clock. Years later, it's often the first person who's built more wealth. Why? Because smart people are trained to associate complexity with value. Simple feels incomplete. So instead of investing consistently, they compare dozens of ETFs. Instead of sticking to a plan, they tweak it every time a new prediction appears online. More information doesn't always help. Eventually it starts competing. One expert says rates will rise, another says they'll fall. The more voices you hear, the harder it is to trust your own judgment. That's analysis paralysis. Not too little information, too much. And while you're searching for the perfect plan, the disciplined person following a simple one keeps moving forward. History has shown what happens when brilliant people believe they've built a perfect system. In the late 1990s, a hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management seemed unbeatable. It was run by legendary traders and 2 Nobel Prize-winning economists. Their models were so sophisticated, people believed they'd found a scientific way to predict risk. For a while they had, billions poured in. Then in 1998, Russia defaulted on its debt, markets panicked, assets that were supposed to move independently crashed together, liquidity vanished. Not because the people involved lacked intelligence, because reality refused to follow the script. The fund became so large that its collapse threatened the entire financial system. The Federal Reserve had to help coordinate a rescue. Markets aren't equations waiting to be solved. They're millions of people making decisions driven by fear, hope, and greed. No spreadsheet fully captures that. So if intelligence isn't the answer, what is? Discipline, the boring kind. The most successful investors don't try to predict every move. They build systems that protect them from themselves, because the biggest threat to your wealth usually isn't the economy, it's you. Imagine two investors. One checks their portfolio 10 times a day, reacting to every rise and dip. The other invests automatically every month and does nothing else. Years later, the second one usually comes out ahead, not because they knew more but because they interfered less. So before your next financial decision, ask 3 questions. Am I doing this because the evidence is strong, or because the story in my head sounds convincing? If I couldn't explain this to someone with no financial background, do I actually understand it myself? And what if I'm wrong? That last one isn't weakness, it's one of the strongest questions an investor can ask. Wealth isn't usually built through moments of brilliance. It's built through years of repeating the right behaviors, especially when they feel ordinary. Isaac Newton understood the laws of the universe, but when it came to money, he made the same mistake millions have made since. He believed that knowing more would protect him. It didn't. The greatest investors aren't perfect, they just build habits that stop a single mistake from becoming a disaster. Not intelligence, not talent. Humility, the willingness to admit the future is uncertain, and the discipline to stick with a plan when emotions are screaming at you to abandon it. So the next time you think, I've finally figured out the market, take it as a warning, not a victory. If this changed how you think about money, there's another trap worth understanding. Why your brain is wired to spend more than you planned, and how businesses quietly take advantage of it every day.